There's another approach where taxation or cap and trade might not work. What if we want to get rid of a pollutant completely? In this case, you'd have an effective tax rate of infinity, and there's no point having a cap and trade because there's nothing to trade. Everything is completely capped. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, might be an example. CFCs, when released into the atmosphere, damage the ozone layer. The ozone layer prevents harmful radiation from the sun reaching the surface of the Earth. If we didn't have the ozone layer, there would be a high incidence of skin cancer, for example. Because of CFC use in industrial production and cooling, an ozone hole had developed over Antarctica, and this was allowing dangerous levels of harmful radiation to reach the surface of the Earth. There was an international treaty drawn up that mandated the reduction and eventual phase out entirely of the use of CFCs. So in this case you might say there's no role for market incentives. But even here there was a plan to use market incentives to make sure that the dwindling supplies of CFCs that still remained in circulation went to the most efficient users possible. Meanwhile, because the production of CFCs had been halted, the ozone hole started to repair itself, and we're on track to solving this environmental problem. Market incentives can be used in conjunction with command and control legislation to find more efficient outcomes of the world's finite resources. We haven't spoken about another common government policy, and that's to use rebates or grants. In other words, a government subsidy to encourage an activity that we think is helpful for the environment. In some ways, this is the reverse of a tax. Here, policymakers encourage people to do more of something by lowering the price. Remember, the less something costs, the more of it will be bought, or the more of that action will be taken. By lowering the cost curve, the price at which demand and supply meet will be lower. Notice that this means that the new quantity, Q new, is higher than it was in the original case. So this policy change means that we have a higher quantity of something produced. Why might we want to do this? Well, there's lots of different policies where the government has decided that we should be doing more of something than we otherwise are. If you think something has a positive externality, for example, the market failure is that we don't do enough of that activity. Governments vary in what they think a positive externality is. For many governments, home ownership is seen as a positive good, that if people own their own homes, they take better care of them, and that is better for the local neighbourhoods. So they encourage home ownership through things like tax rebates. This is very common in places like the US and Australia. Similarly, many countries support farmers with minimum prices for their goods or with special grants. In general, education is heavily subsidised in the developed world. The government feels that it is a positive externality to have highly educated individuals. In the realm of environmental policy, we do see subsidies when we talk about renewable energy. The enormous expansion of wind energy in Europe and the US is at least partly the result of government policies that subsidise the generation of renewable energy sources. Similarly, electric cars are often supported. In the United States, you can get a $7,500 tax rebate if you buy a purely electric car. Sometimes the subsidy is obvious. For example, in the United States, you get a 30% tax rebate on the cost of installing solar panels, and sometimes it is hidden. For example, there is a mandate that power companies have to buy a certain amount of renewable energy, or they have to buy this energy at a certain price, and that's very common in Europe. Or another approach is to support the industry directly, as we see in the solar panel industry in the United States and in China. This has the same effect as a direct subsidy, however. It reduces the price and so encourages consumption. There are two drawbacks to this approach. The first one is that it costs money. So when a government subsidises one activity, that means they have to raise taxes somewhere else or disencourage some other sort of activity somewhere else in the economy. Or consumers might have to pay more somewhere else. So for example, if industry is encouraged to buy renewable energy, it might mean that the consumer pays more for electricity. Secondly, note that this policy encourages consumption. Encouraging consumption is not normally the goal when we look to protect the environment. We instead want to decrease pollution. These subsidies do not directly impact polluting technologies at all, in fact. If my neighbour is financially encouraged to buy an electric car, that might just mean that there is more gasoline available for the rest of us to burn in our internal combustion engines. In effect then, a subsidy to buy electric cars encourages people to drive more miles on roads. It encourages people to use more energy. Similarly, if we incentivise people to buy renewable energy, we're actually encouraging people to consume more energy. So we might use more energy in our homes. Remember when we talked about perverse incentives of increased energy efficiency? Well, here we face the same issue. If we decrease the cost of producing energy by subsidising it, even if it's renewable energy, we incentivise people to use more. So we encourage more consumption. This could potentially encourage overconsumption. So good policy is difficult. We have to know an awful lot about social systems, both societies, economies, political systems, and natural systems. How much harm is really being done, how the natural world reacts. Good policies recognise the inventiveness and individuality of people and work in domains where we know a lot about the environmental impacts of the pollutants that we're trying to control. Furthermore, good policies have to take into account the limitations of our political processes. It's a daunting list, but it seems that to be an environmentally conscious individual, we have to make calculations like this on our own every day. Just like societies, individuals have limited resources of time, attention, money. And so when we decide to do something because we want to help the environment, we have to make a potentially difficult calculation. Should I choose paper or plastic? Should I clean a milk jug before I put it in the recycling? Should I turn off all my computers at the end of the day? Should I unplug my TV from the wall? Maybe all this is in fact too much to ask. In next week's lectures, we'll be looking at where this idea that individuals are responsible for the environment comes from. We'll be looking at the sorts of metrics that are used to determine sustainability. And finally, we'll be considering the question, how much should we as individuals be reasonably expected to do? See you then.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.